Hi everyone, welcome to 4th grade math. Today we're going to be looking at converting fractions to decimals using decimal notation standard 4.NF.6. So there are a few vocabulary and key concepts that we want to go over before we start looking at the activity today. Fractions and decimals are similar because they both are ways to express partial numbers, like we talked about last week. 1/2 is part of a whole. 1 is part, 2 is your whole. We could also see something like a decimal, 0.5. We see here that it's not a full number. It's not a whole number. It is part of something. So fractions and decimals share those similarities. The term decimal notation means converting a fraction into its equal valued decimal. So fractions and decimals are similar because they both express partial numbers, but they can also be equal in value. Decimals are expressed as fractions in tenths, hundredths, thousands, and so on. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that concept here. So, decimals in written form, reviewing this can help guide us for the rest of our lesson today. So, when we look here at this decimal, we may quickly read it as 0.437. You may have heard someone say that, or maybe you say that in that way. But if we actually look at the different place values of this decimal, we can better understand how it's valued. So the place value for this 4 is in the tenths, the 3 is in the hundredths, the 7 is in the thousandths. I always like to say you can kind of sound like a snake, tenths, hundredths, thousandths with your decimals. So if we look down here at this example, 0.52, if we read it in its proper form, 52 hundredths, it will actually guide us into better understanding how to convert decimals, fractions, back and forth. Okay? So, we're going to look at that again here. Additional key concepts. How do I write fractions and decimals in word form? So here I have a fraction, 4/10. When I see that fraction, I say it as 4/10. Here I have this decimal, 0.4. As we just went over, that 4 is in which place value spot? It's in the tenths. So remember that, it's in the tenths. So inadvertently, we're able to say 4/10 is the word form for this decimal. And we have an equal fraction to this decimal. 4/10 the fraction is the same value as 4/10 the decimal. So once again, just to go over that, when we say 4/10 as a fraction in word form or written form, we write it as 4/10. This decimal 0.4 or 4/10 can be written as 4/10. Let's take that a step further. So, starting up at the top, I have a example for you, similar to what you just saw. Fraction, 8/10. How we say it, 8/10. Our decimal, 8/10. This 8 is in the tenths place value. Let's go down to this second one. Here we see 32 hundredths. In word form, it is written as 32 hundredths. So, how can we convert that into a decimal? Well, first we're going to start with our decimal point, and then remembering that my place values, the first is the tenths, the next is the hundredths. I'm going to place my number into those slots, therefore making equal fractions to your decimal. Now, we're going to work backwards, solving back towards making a fraction. We read this decimal as 5/10. Word form, 5/10. It almost helps you write the fraction when you say it out loud. 5/10. 5/10. 5/10. Okay. Last one. If I say this decimal out loud, it's going to help me fill in my fraction. 62 hundredths. Word form, fraction. $62 hundredths. All equal and all of equal values. Okay, so the next two slides that I'm going to show you are just visual representations of the same concepts. They are things that will come up in your activity and in various activities that you may be working on. And they're just important for you to acknowledge a few different things. In this first graph, the one that is orange, this graph is broken up into tens. Okay, so there's 10 different columns here. So if there are 10 columns and 3 are filled in, 1, 2, 3, I can determine that 3/10 is your fraction, excuse me. So 3 of the 10 are filled in, 3/10 is your fraction. Saying it out loud to yourself, 3/10, will help you determine your decimal. Always start with your decimal point. 3/10, it's in the tenths place value. Now, this last one. If you had all day, you could go ahead and count these lovely boxes here, but I will go ahead and tell you that there are 100 total boxes. Let's count how many are filled in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 hundredths. So 5 over 100. Now, saying this out loud and remembering our place values for our decimals. Remember that it goes tenths, hundredths, thousandths. We're going to put this decimal point, and we're actually, because this 5 is in the hundredths, we're going to put a 0. Oops. And a 5. There you go. Once again, because that 5 is in the hundredths place value. At the end of this, all the graph, the fraction, the decimal are equal. The graph, the fraction, the decimal are equal. So if you do run into something like this on your activity, make sure that you leave your tenths place value with a 0 so that your decimal, doesn't end up saying 5/10, and it says instead 5 hundredths. Okay. Using a number line. So I actually went ahead and used the example that is in your interactive notebooks. So if you do feel lost for this particular activity, go ahead and make sure that you refer to this video so that you're able to complete the activity in your notebook, because it's the exact same one. So first things first, get yourself acquainted with your number line. Starting on the left-hand side is the 0. In the middle is 0.5, which we discussed is the same as 1/2. The far right is 1 whole. Remember that fractions and decimals are similar in that they are parts of a whole. They are not 1 whole yet. So we're moving towards becoming 1 whole. The next thing that I would advise you to do is what I listed here as step 1. Label each dash mark. this is going to help you tremendously to place these decimals down here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, remember our 0.5, okay, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, okay? So this is going to help us place our decimals onto the number line below. So moving to our placements. So on your end, you're going to be dragging each of the letters to a particular spot on the number line. Let's start with A. It says 85 hundredths. First thing that I would do is look to your 0.8 to 0.9 space on the number line. 0.85 is going to fall somewhere between those two. So you're gonna go ahead and put an A. Okay. I'm just gonna cross it off because I did it. B asks us to place B at 0.6 or 6/10. So I have already labeled that, luckily, so I'm going to place that really easily there. Now, for C, we see 3 hundredths. 3 hundredths. Placing it here at 3/10 would actually be incorrect. We want to make sure that we're placing it below 1/10 because it is even smaller. So this is actually going to be placed between our 0 and our 0.1. Now, D, 0.2. Luckily, we've already placed that. We can put our D labeled there. E, 0.44. So what I would recommend is finding the space between 0.4 and 0.5. 0.44 is going to be in between those two decimal points, E. Now finally, F. Here we see, instead of 0.03, we see 0.3. We've already labeled that and can place it onto our number line. So, on your number line just make sure that you're dragging it as close as possible to the digit, to the decimal that you can. Remember, just like when we saw in the graph here, this space on the hundredths, very little space is filled in for 5 hundredths. Imagine if it was 0.03, it'd be even smaller. So it's not the same as how much space that is filled in when it's 3/10. So we can remember that 3 hundredths is even smaller than 1/10. So we're gonna place it between the 0 and the 0.1 on our number line. Okay. Last but not least, that is the end of our program for today. Your homework, your assignment online is your interactive notebook 4.NF.6. It's due Thursday, 4/23. Your 4th grade math teachers, myself, Miss Mendoza, Mr. V, and Miss Lass are here to support you in the Google Hangout. If you need any help on these activities, we wish you the best of luck. See you next time. Bye.